The portal tore open above the Pacific at 3:14 a.m., a wound of violet light stitched across the sky, wide enough to swallow a city. Fleet Commander Zarnvel had crossed 1,000 dead worlds through 1,000 identical portals. He knew the pattern by heart: primitive planet, primitive defenses, easy harvest. He had done this so many times the ritual bored him. But not tonight. Tonight, beneath his composure, a small, private fear moved. The same fear that had followed him since the day the Grand Council pinned this expedition's success to his name alone. Command it well, Vel, or don't come back at all. His mentor's words, spoken the day Zarn accepted this fleet. He hadn't understood them then. He was beginning to. His sensors chimed. Then chimed again, faster, sharper, wrong. Sir, his tactical officer said, voice tightening with something Zarn hadn't heard from her in decades of service. Uncertainty. This world has orbital defense platforms, fusion-grade shielding, weapons signatures we've never logged in any Dominion archive. Zarn stared at the readout, and for the first time in a very long career, the numbers refused to make sense. This was not the Earth his scouts had promised. Something on the other side of that portal was waiting for them, and it did not look afraid. The Dominion fleet spilled out of the portal in perfect formation. 400 warships, their hulls the color of dried blood, arranged in the harvesting pattern the Kelvax had used on 11 previous worlds. Fleet Commander Zarnvel stood at the command spire of his flagship, the Reaper's Patience, for eyes fixed on the blue-green planet swelling larger on the viewport with every passing second. By every calculation his people had made, this conquest should already be finished. Scouting probes sent decades ago had returned images of a divided world, nations at war with each other, orbital capability limited to a handful of fragile satellites. The Dominion had crossed realities specifically to find worlds like this one. Soft, unprepared, ripe for the taking. Orbital scan complete, his sensor officer reported. Her mandibles clicked together in a rhythm Zarn recognized as distress. Commander, I'm reading 41 military satellites in high orbit, all active, all networked. And, she paused. 6 vessels rising from the surface right now. Their acceleration curves don't match anything in our threat database. Nothing close. Zarn's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. Human vessels? Human origin, yes, Commander. But the hull composition is layered plasteel titanium alloy. She looked up at him. That's our metallurgy. Refined further than our own shipyards currently produce. A cold, unfamiliar feeling crawled through Zarn's chest. In 300 years of conquest, across 11 successful harvests, the Kelvax Dominion had never once encountered a species that had already reverse-engineered their technology before first contact had even properly begun. Open a channel, Zarn said, forcing his voice level. The channel crackled to life. No panic, no pleading, just a calm, flat human voice. Unidentified fleet, this is Colonel Marcus Reyes, Earth Unified Defense Command. You are currently inside a designated exclusion zone. You have 30 seconds to reverse course. Zarn almost laughed. You are addressing Fleet Commander Zarnvel of the Kelvax Dominion, human. Your world belongs to us now. Surrender your cities, and your species may be permitted to survive as laborers. A pause. Then, quieter, almost amused. Yeah, we've heard that one before. Before, Zarn repeated. 29 seconds, Commander. Zarn cut the channel, jaw tightening. Bring the fleet to attack formation. The order was barely finished when the planet's surface lit up beneath them. Not chaotic, panicked fire, but the precise, layered volleys of a military that had drilled this exact scenario 1,000 times over, waiting for the day it would happen again. 3 Dominion frigates vanished in the first exchange, swallowed by clean white light before their shields had even fully engaged. Zarn gripped the command rail so hard the metal groaned. That is not possible, he whispered. This world has never fought a war beyond its own atmosphere. There is no precedent for this. More ships fell. A cruiser lost its port engines and began a slow, burning spiral toward the atmosphere below. Screams crackled over the comm from crews Zarn had led for a decade. Pull back the second wave, he ordered. forcing steel into his voice even as certainty drained out of him. Full defensive posture. Firing solutions calculated, Commander, his weapons officer replied. But their point defense response time is... She stared at her own readout like it had betrayed her. Faster than ours. A junior officer near the rear console spoke up before he could stop himself. Commander, permission to voice a theory. Speak. The Dominion has catalogued portal drift before. Rare cases, expeditions that opened a gate to the correct coordinates but the wrong version. A branch reality adjacent to the intended target. He swallowed hard. If this world diverged from our scouting reports decades ago, everything since would have unfolded differently. We may not be the first Dominion fleet to try this coordinate. The bridge went very quiet. Zarn's mind raced back through 3 centuries of institutional memory. Nothing in it prepared him for a planet that fought like it had already buried a war and built a religion out of never letting it happen twice. Pull every archived record tied to this coordinate, Zarn ordered, his voice low. I want to know if the Dominion has been here before and simply didn't tell the rest of us. The search began immediately, 3 analysts diverting from their battle stations to comb through centuries of compressed archive data, cross-referencing coordinate strings against every logged expedition since the Dominion's founding charter. Zarn watched them work, his claws still locked around the command rail, and found himself calculating odds he hadn't needed to calculate in decades. Not odds of victory, which had always been assumed, but odds of simple survival. Commander, his second-in-command said quietly, stepping closer so the words wouldn't carry to the rest of the bridge. The fleet is asking for orders. Morale is... He hesitated, choosing the word carefully. Fragile. Morale will hold, Zarn said, though he wasn't certain he believed it himself. Bring the fleet to a defensive perimeter at the edge of the gravity well. No further advance until we understand what we're facing. Below them, human formations continued their disciplined defense. Patient, precise, and utterly unimpressed by the fleet still smoldering in their sky. Zarn watched a Dominion cruiser, its hull scorched black along one flank, limp toward the rear of the formation, trailing atmosphere from a dozen small breaches. His crew would live. Others would not be so fortunate. He stared down at the burning wreckage, at fire raining up from a planet his intelligence had promised was defenseless. Then whose Earth? He said slowly. Did we just invade? No one answered. No one had an answer to give. The silence stretched long enough that Zarn finally turned from the viewport entirely, facing his bridge crew. Frightened, disciplined, waiting for him to tell them what came next. He had led these people through 11 successful campaigns. He had never once had to tell them he didn't know what to do. Damage report, he said instead, falling back on the only certainty he had left. Full accounting. I want to know exactly what this world cost us before I decide what we do about it. Colonel Marcus Reyes stood inside the command bunker beneath Cheyenne Mountain, hands folded behind his back, watching the orbital feed with the calm of a man who had rehearsed this exact nightmare in his head for 40 years. Around him, the room moved with controlled urgency. No shouting, just soldiers doing a job they had trained for since childhood. Enemy fleet regrouping at high orbit, said Lieutenant Sarah Kim, fingers dancing across the display. 3 frigates destroyed, 1 cruiser crippled and descending. They're rattled, sir. It worked because we've done this before, Reyes said quietly, not taking his eyes off the burning wreckage on the feed. Behind him, General Elena Cho stepped forward, the tap of her cane cutting through the low hum of consoles. Bring up the old footage, Cho ordered. The recruits need to see it. All of them. The wall screen flickered to grainy archival video. The sky burning orange over a much younger Earth, 40 years gone. Cities in ruins. A desperate resistance throwing everything it had at an alien fleet that had come through a portal that looked exactly like the one still glowing faintly on tonight's readout. That was the day we learned we weren't alone in this multiverse, Cho said, eyes distant. And it was the day we lost 11 million people learning it. Reyes's jaw tightened. He didn't look at the screen. He never did at this part. Somewhere in that footage, 3 seconds of grainy static he could recite from memory, was a name he hadn't said out loud in 19 years. A young officer near the back spoke up. "General, if we beat them once, why didn't they ever come back?" "Because we made absolutely sure the next ones who tried would regret it," Cho said, turning to face the room. "Every ship in orbit right now was built from what we salvaged off their wreckage. We didn't just survive the first invasion, son. We became it." "Orbital Platform 7 is losing power," a technician suddenly called out, alarm cracking through her voice. "Coolant line breach, Commander. If it goes fully offline, we lose 30% coverage over the eastern seaboard in the next window." Reyes was already moving. "Get me a manual override." "Working on it, sir. But someone has to reroute the secondary line physically. The automated system's fried." "Then send someone." Cho's voice, flat and final. Kim's headset crackled. A voice, young, breathless, from the platform itself. "Colonel, this is Ortiz. I can reach the line, but I've got maybe 90 seconds before the breach hits the reactor core." The room went silent except for the countdown ticking in the corner of the display. "Ortiz," Reyes said, keeping his voice level though his knuckles had gone white on the console edge. "You reroute that line and you get clear. That's an order, not a suggestion." "Copy, Colonel." 70 seconds. 50. The whole bunker seemed to hold its breath with him. Lines rerouted. Platform stable. Pause, static crackling. "I'm clear, sir. Cutting it closer than I'd like, but I'm clear." Reyes exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and only then let himself glance, briefly, at the corner of the archive screen still frozen on the old footage. A name etched into a wall of 11 million others, one he still hadn't said out loud tonight. "Reroute holds," Kim confirmed. "Coverage restored." "Copy that," Reyes said. "Good work, Ortiz. Buy that man a drink when this is over." Kim allowed herself half a breath of relief before her jaw set again. "Sir, with respect, why are we still holding back? We have 14 of their ships crippled. We could press the advantage, take the commander captive. Because that's not why we built this defense grid." Cho cut in, voice sharp enough to still the room. "We didn't spend 40 years turning this planet into a fortress so we could become conquerors ourselves. There's a difference between winning a war and becoming the thing that started it." Kim didn't back down immediately. "With respect, General, restraint didn't save Ortiz 90 seconds ago. Speed did. I'm not saying become them. I'm saying don't hand them a second chance to come back stronger." The room went quiet in a different way this time. Not fear, but the particular tension of two people who both had a point. Reyes let it sit a moment before answering. "Noted, Lieutenant. And you're not wrong to push. But a captured commander is a liability. A commander who limps home and tells his superiors exactly what happened here. That's a weapon we don't even have to fire twice." Kim considered that, then gave a small, unconvinced nod, the kind that meant filed away, not agreed with, and Reyes respected her more for not pretending otherwise. On the main display, Zarnvel's fleet began, slowly and reluctantly, to regroup. "Open the channel again," Reyes said. "Let's see if the commander's ready to listen now." The Dominion fleet regrouped at the edge of Earth's gravity well, its formation ragged for the first time in Zarnvel's long career. 14 ships lost. Hundreds of soldiers dead. "Commander," his second-in-command said carefully. "Orders." Zarn didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the human fleet holding position below. Not advancing, not retreating, simply waiting, the way a predator waits when it already knows it has one. He thought briefly of the message that would be waiting for him if he failed here. Not a reprimand. Grand Marshal Threx did not deal in reprimands. He dealt in silence and then in replacements. Zarn had watched 2 commanders vanish from the Dominion registry after lesser failures than this. No trial. No explanation. Just an empty seat at the next council session. "Open the channel," Zarn finally said, and the words tasted strange. Unfamiliar. Like surrender before the surrender had actually happened. Reyes answered almost instantly. "Change your mind about surrendering, Commander?" "I want to understand," Zarn said, and the admission cost him something visible. 40 years ago, my people's expedition failed here, against a civilization with no spaceflight. How does a pre-spaceflight civilization defeat an interstellar fleet? A pause. When Reyes spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. We didn't defeat them with better weapons, Commander. We barely had weapons that could reach orbit. Your fleetcaster had better ships, better shields, better everything on paper. But they fought this planet like it was just another harvest. We fought back like it was the last day our species would ever get to exist. His voice hardened. You don't beat that kind of fleet with technology. Not on the first day. You beat it with the one thing your soldiers didn't have. And what is that? A reason big enough to bleed for. Zarn's claws tightened against the rail until the metal creaked. He thought of the Dominion's endless campaigns, world after world catalogued by soldiers who fought for conquest bonuses, not for anything as fragile and stubborn as a home worth dying to protect. He thought of his own crew, and wondered, for the first time in 3 centuries, what they were actually fighting for beyond his orders. Commander, his sensor officer interrupted. Human vessels are moving. They're forming an escort pattern around our fleet's position. Zarn frowned. Explain. Reyes's voice returned, calm and final. We're not here to wipe your fleet out, Vel. We could. You already know that. But we're here to send you back through that portal with a message. A pause. Tell your Dominion Council that the next fleet who comes looking for an easy planet should read the reports from the last fleet first. Zarn opened the channel one final time before the portal coordinates locked. Colonel Reyes, a question before we part ways. Still here, Commander. Your general, the older one, the one who has clearly seen this before. She survived the first invasion herself, didn't she? A pause. She did. Lost her entire unit doing it. Lost a lot more than that, if I'm honest. But that's hers to tell, not mine. And she chose to spend the rest of her life preparing for a war that might never come again. She chose to make sure that if it did come again, Reyes said, the next generation wouldn't have to bury as many people as she did. Zarn absorbed that in silence. In 300 years of Dominion doctrine, no world he had ever harvested had produced anything like it. A species that turned catastrophic loss into patient, decades-long resolve rather than either extinction or surrender. You understand, Zarn said finally, that my retreat today does not end this. My report will reach the Grand Council. There will be other fleets. Reroute the fleet, Zarn said quietly. Full retreat. Portal coordinates locked. His second-in-command hesitated. Commander, the Dominion does not retreat. Zarn turned to face him. The Dominion has never met an Earth like this one. We are leaving with our ships intact so that someone can warn the Council exactly what's waiting on the other side of that portal. He looked back at the planet one final time. That is not retreat, Lieutenant. That is survival. Learn the difference before it costs you your fleet or your life. Reyes watched from the bunker as the last Dominion ship folded itself back through the shrinking portal, the violet wound in the sky sealing shut like a healing scar. Silence settled over the command room. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Quiet exhales, a few relieved laughs, a young officer wiping her eyes and pretending, badly, that she wasn't. General Cho lowered herself into a chair, the careful stiffness of someone who had carried this moment inside her bones for 40 years. You know this doesn't end it, she said. That fleet was a scouting force. Whatever sent them will send more. Bigger ones. I know, Reyes said. And next time, they'll come prepared for exactly what we did to them today. Reyes nodded slowly. Then we'll be more prepared too. Kim looked between them, still catching her breath. Sir, what do we do now? Reyes turned from the window, and for the first time since the alarms had torn him out of bed that morning, he allowed himself something close to a real smile. Now we stop calling it the first invasion like it's the only one that ever mattered. We start calling it the last time anyone got to surprise us. Cho let out a short, tired laugh. 40 years of preparation, and it took them 20 minutes to figure out they'd picked the wrong Earth. Wrong universe, wrong planet, wrong century, Reyes said. Doesn't matter which door they open next time. We'll already be standing on the other side of it. Later that morning, after the debriefings ended, Reyes found Cho alone in the memorial hall. A long, sunlit corridor lined with 11 million names, etched in pale stone that caught the morning light streaming through skylights built so the room would never feel like a tomb. "You did good today, Marcus," Cho said without turning. "We did good," he corrected. "This wasn't a one-man job." Cho reached out and touched a name near the bottom of the nearest column. A name Reyes had never asked about, though he'd noticed her stop there before. "I used to wonder if all of this was going to turn out to be for nothing, that we'd spend our whole lives getting ready for a door that never opened again. And now," she turned to face him, allowing herself something that looked almost like relief. "Now I know it wasn't for nothing." Reyes finally let his eyes move to the column he always avoided. Found the name he'd been carrying silently since Cho first mentioned the old footage, and, quietly, for the first time in 19 years, said it out loud. "Hey, Danny," he murmured. "We held the line." Cho didn't ask. She didn't need to. She simply rested a hand on his shoulder, and together they stood in the sunlit hall, saying nothing else, needing nothing else. 3 realities away, in a Dominion command spire lit by the cold, distant light of a dying star, an aide placed a single data drive on the Grand Council's obsidian table, his hands trembling slightly. "Survivors from Expedition Fleetville have returned through the Western Relay," the aide said. 14 ships lost. Full retreat ordered by the fleet commander himself. A counselor's 4 eyes narrowed to thin, furious slits. "Retreat? The Dominion does not retreat. Explain this failure before I have Commander Vell's rank stripped from him in absentia." "With respect, counselor, I'd recommend you see the footage first." The screen flickered to life. Human ships holding disciplined formation, orbital defenses firing with terrifying precision, and finally, Zarn's voice, recorded mid-retreat, shaken but unmistakably certain. "This is not the Earth we were promised. This world remembers wars we haven't fought yet, and it has been waiting 40 years for us to walk back through that door." The council chamber fell silent. At the head of the table, Grand Marshal Threx, a name that had ended 3 careers this cycle alone, leaned forward slowly. "Wake the dread Meridian," he said. "Full battle fleet. 900 vessels. If Vell's report is accurate, we will not make his mistake twice. Set the launch window for 1 Dominion cycle from today." Somewhere in the depths of the archive, a dust-covered file, sealed 42 years ago, marked Expedition Fleetkesser. Total loss was quietly reopened for the first time since it had been filed away and forgotten. Across the multiverse, on a world of blue oceans and quiet, watchful skies, humanity slept soundly, unaware that a name, the dread Meridian, and a countdown had just been set in motion, light years and realities away. They had done this before. They would do it again. And this time, they would know exactly how long they had left to get ready.